Hello everyone and welcome back to another tier list / ranked video. Today I'm going to be doing a recommendation that I got that I actually really liked, and that is ranking the worlds by difficulty. Now what this is going to mean is that S is the most difficult, F is the least difficult. It's not necessarily, it doesn't have anything to do with enjoyment, it's just I'm ranking them by difficulty. Now obviously I don't really know. It obviously depends on the schools, because some schools will find other worlds more difficult than others. For example, Balance is going to find Zafaria significantly more difficult than Storm does. Honestly, a lot of schools are going to find these worlds more difficult than Storm. I'm going to try to keep in mind my experiences with all of the schools in every world, see which ones I found to be the worst, the most hard, and kind of go from there. I'm going to try to also keep in mind that not everyone has enchants, not everyone has the best gear, but I will also think about, you know, where the gear is relative to the world. You'll see. So let's just get started. First on our list is Wizard City. Now, Wizard City is not difficult. It's not difficult at all. Without enchants, though, it is a bit more difficult than with. I'd like to say with enchants, it's probably one of the easiest worlds in this game, if not the easiest world in this game. But without, it's a bit more difficult. And I'm going to include Colossus Boulevard and Triton Underwater in this, which ups the difficulty a bit. Obviously, it's not difficult at all, but it's not F tier difficulty as in the lowest of the lows. I think that it is about E tier difficulty. It's definitely still a bit difficult, especially if you don't have enchants. If you're soloing, it's likely that you might die at least once if you're soloing without enchants. So that's that. That's one thing. There you go. Also, I don't know why I have Chrysalis music in the background. It just kind of happened that way. So just enjoy it. Next is Crocotopia. Now, Crocotopia, I wouldn't consider to be very difficult at all. It's not the most difficult world out of all of them by far. The only thing that's really difficult about it, I would say, is if you are one of the elemental schools, obviously Fire, Ice, or Storm, the enemies are going to be Fire, Ice, or Storm, so you're going to have difficulties with that. But I'd say that it's definitely decently easy of a world, especially if you have enchants. A lot of these worlds in the beginning are whether you have enchants or not. I'm going to take them as if you don't have enchants, which for me is kind of crazy because I have enchants. I always use enchants, but I'll take them as if you don't have enchants, the way that it's meant to be played. Crocotopia, for me, would probably be harder than Wizard City, but not that much more difficult. Probably about D tier. It's not very difficult in the slightest for the level, but it definitely has a difficulty to it above Wizard City. Specifically, mob battles, it's prior to having a hit-all spell, and the enemies, you have to fight 2 at once, so that is a bit more of a difficult thing. There's a few defeat and collect quests, which is a bit more difficult. Overall, I'd just say it's a bit harder than Wizard City, but not by much. Marleybone, honestly, is a world that isn't too difficult, not too much more difficult than most worlds, but it's important to note that if you are soloing, or if you are, you know, if you don't have two stronger wizards, you're going to have difficulty with things such as Big Ben, which is a very, very long tower. But I'd probably still put it on level of Crocotopia. Now, this is where things get a bit divert. Actually, I'm going to move Grizzleheim up past Dragonspire because it's Winter Tusk. Let's move on to Wisteria, and Wisteria is probably going to be our easiest world. In my opinion, it's probably the easiest world. None of the enemies are too difficult. You're probably going to enter at around level 30, level 20 maybe, which means you're probably going to have maybe Zeus gear. If not, you're at least going to have the school design gear for level 25. I would say it's a very easy world, especially because you now have AoE spells at that level. I really doubt anyone's entering it at level 20 exactly. So that means that everyone except Death and Life will have an AoE spell at level 22. Except for Storm, actually. Storm doesn't get Tempest until 28. But I would still consider it to be one of the easiest world. It's relatively easy. The bosses have decent health for your level. It's about Marleybone level of difficulty, between Marleybone and Mushu level of difficulty, but it's relatively short and relatively easy. So I would consider it to be that. I mean, recently I did it on a life, and it was one of the easiest worlds I've ever had to do. Definitely an extremely easy world. Let me know what you think about that. Next is Aquila. Now, Aquila is actually decently difficult. Did someone just teleport to me? No. Okay. Aquila is actually a decently difficult world in all stages. At level 30, you have to deal with the fact that, you know, like a Poyo Bright one has 3,000 health. That's a decent amount of health. Zeus has 4,500, I think. That's also a decent amount of health for that level. Ares has a lot of health as well. Honestly, these level 30 enemies have about Dragonspire level difficulty, but that's just that. Atlantia is a bit more difficult as well. It has a lot of enemies. Poseidon has the cheat of no feints, which makes it a bit more difficult for that level. And then, don't even get me started on Tartarus, which is one of the longest and hardest dungeons of all time. Okay. Let me amend that. Longest and hardest dungeons for that level. Because obviously if you're a max level, it's going to be a lot easier. But as a level 90, trust me when I say it is painful. Just doing my balance and my fire, it's actually funny. It was the only dungeon I've ever failed in my life because I actually just like quit. I was done. It's very difficult. I would consider Aquila to actually be A tier difficulty. It is extremely difficult for the level you're going into it, and I would consider it as such. Definitely around there in difficulty. But now that we've ranked Aquila, and with the worlds we've done, we're now level 30. Which means these next coming worlds are going to be significantly easier because you're either going to have Senator's gear, Zeus gear, or if you're level 40, you're going to have Barking on Palace gear. So Mushu, in my opinion, is actually easier than Crocotopia and Marleybone. Probably on level with Wizard City, because you have that higher level gear, and also most boss battles are going to be really easy. You're also going to have feint at this point, which makes them even easier. I would consider Mushu to be easier than Crocotopia and Marleybone. People might find that to be a bit strange, but I think Mushu is actually relatively easy. I think that a lot of people just find it to be boring, which I don't personally find it to be boring. I find it to be fun, but I think a lot of bosses aren't that difficult. Actually, you know what? No, I'm actually going to bump it up a tier. I don't like that these three are on the same tier. Maybe move Marleybone up. No. I think that that's fair. The reason why I'm moving it up a tier is because the Jade Oni is actually relatively difficult because of the amount of health he has. He shields a lot, and there's also a few solo fights that can be a bit difficult. So I'll put that into D tier, actually, now that I think about the solo fights. An okay in difficulty world, not the most difficult, not the least difficult. Next is Dragonspire, which I'm definitely going to smack into B tier. Dragonspire is actually a bit difficult for your level. You're going to be around level 38 to 45 when you're doing Dragonspire. In that time, there's a lot of bosses that have about 3,000 to 4,000 health. They are a bit difficult. There's a lot of towers, a lot of difficult bosses, a lot of very long dungeons. Definitely is a difficult world. Not as difficult as Aquila, but definitely difficult. I would say that Malistaire fight is actually still a difficult fight for that level, despite him having 8k health instead of 10k health now. I would still consider it to be very difficult. So I think that that's fair at that stage. Next is Grizzleheim and Wintertusk. Now this obviously depends. I really wish they were split. If they were split, I would put Grizzleheim at about E tier, and Wintertusk is an S tier. So I'm going to rank this at about a B tier as well to kind of average those two out, but I'll give you my reasons. Grizzleheim, I would consider an E tier because obviously the enemies are very easy, especially since you're likely not doing it at level 20. Actually, you know what? I would move that. No. I'm moving this up to A tier. I forgot about one crucial fact, and that's that Jotun is part of the Grizzleheim quest, and Ravenscar exists. I would put Grizzleheim up actually at C tier. Sorry, sometimes it blanks in my mind. Also, I'm very tired right now. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully you don't mind the mistakes. Jotun, which is a boss with like 7k health, and he has 2 other bosses with like 4k health each, is difficult. Pretty insanely difficult, actually, for that level, at level 40. 2, Ravenscar. Ravenscar is long. It is a long street. It takes an hour even when you're boosting yourself up. Even when you're questing with a max level wizard, it still takes an hour to do Ravenscar. It is that long. So Grizzleheim's definitely a C tier for me, but Winter Tusk is an obvious S tier. Every enemy has an insane amount of health. Critical exists for them, but potentially not for you. Everything is difficult. A lot of things have cheats. It's a difficult world, especially for that level when you don't have Waterworks gear or you don't have Winter Tusk crafted gear. It's an S, obvious S tier, which averages it to about A tier. I think that's fair, and I think that's correct. So, I think that's fair. Celestia, I'm going to put into C tier. I feel like that's pretty fair. I think that Celestia isn't insanely difficult, but it's not insanely easy. There's a lot of enemies that are actually surprisingly difficult. There's defeat and collect quests that are surprisingly long, dungeons that are surprisingly long, but it's not insanely difficult, especially if you do Winter Tusk first. It's not that difficult. So I'd put it into C tier. I think that that's pretty fair. Next on our list is Zafaria. Now, Zafaria, in my opinion, is not very difficult in the slightest. I think, actually, Zafaria is decently easy. I think that the main issue with Zafaria that a lot of people find is the length, and also Drum Jungle. Drum Jungle in of itself is very long. I wouldn't consider it to be that difficult, though. I really don't like these 3 over here being on the same level, so I'm going to move Wizard City down, and I'm going to put Mushu down like this. I think that that's more fair, and I'm going to put Zafaria on the same tier as Marleybone and Crocotopia. Now, people might be asking, like, what is Zafaria on the same level as Crocotopia and Marleybone? I think for me, it's important to note that the level that you're doing it, right? Because in Zafaria, you have full Waterworks gear. You have about 80 to 100 damage. You are actually physically doing much more damage. You have feints, potentially even double feints with Jewel of the Feint. It's going to be so much easier for you than a level 10 is in Crocotopia, where they don't have a hit all spell, they don't have enchants, they don't have, they don't have all that stuff. So I think that that's fair, but I do think that Celestia is a bit harder than Zafaria overall, only slightly though. If we're doing this actually, like if I rank these, like physically rank them as well, like this, I think that this is about how it would go for me. Maybe putting this above Aquila like that. Yeah, let's physically rank them as well. So this will be my ranking. I think that Zafaria could maybe even go up here. But I'd put it down here. I don't think it's that difficult at all. I mean, if you disagree with me, let me know. I just don't think it's that difficult. Next is Avalon, which is quite a bit more difficult. I would say it's about equal to lesser than Dragonspire. The enemies have a lot of health. They have crit. Need to sneeze. Sorry about that. It's like my obligatory once a video sneeze. The enemies are difficult. There's a lot of defeat and collect quests. Specifically, the Death Seraph comes to mind, where the drop rate is nothing. It's a longer world. I particularly do enjoy it, but it's definitely one of the more difficult worlds. Certain enemies are more difficult than others, and honestly, the final dungeons are a challenge. So, I think that that's pretty fair. I think that that's a pretty fair ranking. Next is Azteca, which, as I've said in the past, I don't think is as difficult as people make it out to be. I think it's just very, very long. Now, is it difficult? Yes. Is it as difficult as it used to be? No. So, I think I'll put it up here at around this level. I don't think it's the hardest. I think it's just people either have a conception based on the past where it used to be the most difficult world, or, and this is a heavy or, their opinion is changed by the severe length of the world. It is a very, very long world. So I'll put that there. I think that's fair, and I think that's where Azteca belongs. Next is Chrysalis, which is going to be my first and probably only S tier. The thing about Chrysalis is it depends on what part you're ranking. And I really wish I could go back to that other video and rank Chrysalis by part 1s and part 2. Because part 1 is, like, part 1's my least favorite world. Part 2 is actually probably more a C to A tier of my favorite worlds, right? So that's where that comes in. But in terms of difficulty, it's difficult all the way throughout. It's more difficult than Azteca, and if you don't think it's more difficult than Azteca, I don't know where you've been, I don't know what you've been doing, but Chrysalis is definitely more difficult than Azteca. The bosses have more health, more crit. The only thing that they don't really have is the dual typing that Azteca had, where some bosses would, you know, use Ifrit or Stormlord or whatever when they're not of that school. I just genuinely think out of all these worlds, Chrysalis is the hardest. Also, the sheer length of it. If we're talking about Azteca being long, Chrysalis is actually longer. Chrysalis has 277 quests. I think Azteca has about 220 to 240. So I think that's important to note. Chrysalis is very difficult. Also, for another reason, is that you don't get Malistaire gear until about halfway through with it, which is important because it's kind of like an in-between point where you want more damage than the Waterworks gear, but you can't really switch off the Waterworks gear yet to get to Malistaire gear. So I think that's important to know. It's very difficult. I think that that's fair. If you disagree with me, let me know. Next is Polaris. Now, Polaris, I would put down here around Celestia level. Actually, a bit more difficult than Celestia. And the reason for that is that they nerfed the health again. This is when they did the hard reset and made the health go way back down. The bosses average about 10k, which is really nice. Also, the fact you have Malistaire gear, so you're going to be trooping through this world. But it's important to note there is some difficult bosses as well. Baba Yaga is a bit difficult. The Rat is a bit difficult. All of those bosses actually do show some difficulty. There are some bosses in the Kataba ice block that are also difficult as well. I think that that's fair. I wouldn't call it nearly as difficult as Avalon and Dragonspire, especially because of the Malistaire gear thing, where wizards that previously had 70 to 80 damage now have 120, right? Significant upgrade. I think that that's fair. Next is Mirage, and it's been a while since I've done Mirage, but I know that there is some like insanely difficult bosses in Mirage, especially towards the end. I would definitely put it up here around this level. Let me know if I'm wrong, because again, it has been a very long time since I've done Mirage, so I'm sorry if I don't really know exactly, but I do remember there being some difficult bosses. Like I think there's Old Cobb you fight at the end, and he has like 100k health or something, and then there's this one genie lady that has pretty difficult cheats. So I think that B tier is pretty safe. If not, maybe put it a bit higher, like above Aquila and Grizzleheim. Again, I'm not sure. This is one I can't be sure of. Imperia, I would actually probably put around equal to above Mirage. Let's put it up here. I think that Imperia does have some difficulty to it, but obviously not as much, especially since you can get Dragoon gear after part 1. So I think part 2 would be significantly easier with Dragoon gear, and I think that's important to note. So yeah, I think that that's fair. I think a lot of bosses are more difficult and have some difficulties to them. I like I like it. I think that the difficulty is greater than some of the past worlds, and I think that's fair. Let me know if I'm wrong. Again, for all these, let me know if I'm wrong. Next, we're going to go to the Catacombs, which is probably up here with Chrysalis. The only thing about it that I'd say is that you're more likely to find someone to quest with in the Catacombs than you are in Chrysalis. So let's put it up here. I think the only thing is that I know that the Devourer exists, which is pretty freaking difficult, and all the bosses actually are difficult. Like Detritus has like 40k health. A lot of these bosses have 50k health. So I think actually the Catacombs is up there, potentially above Chrysalis. I could be wrong, but I think that that's a good location for it. So I'll put it there. And finally on our list is Caramel. Caramel I'm going to put down here, probably like here, specifically because it's actually a really easy world. None of the bosses present particularly any difficulty, especially if you have Dragoon gear. I mean, my fire went through it with like 160 something damage. So yeah, it took 10 hours. It was a pretty good world. I actually really loved the world, but it wasn't that difficult. I think the hardest part was actually King Gobblesmack with his cheat where he would damage you for every enemy you killed. It was as easy as I mean, actually, I did it in a cheesy way with my friend. I think we like killed and then had someone join the fight and then heal the other person like the next round when the other enemies spawn in, and then they would hit and they would die. It didn't really make sense, but it worked. It was stupid, but obviously the way to do it is to like kill one, heal, continue on in that vein. I think it was one of the more difficult fights, and the ending actually, the Aberrant Paradox actually is difficult as well. I think that there were some difficult fights. Actually, you know what? Let's put it a bit higher because of that. Let's put it up here. I think that that's fair, but the rest of it is not difficult in the slightest. So I think that that's good. That's my list for the hardest difficulty worlds. Please let me know if you disagree with me in the comments. I'm sure some of you will, but I did try to take into account what gear you'd have at this level, what bosses there were. I think the one that probably is the most wrong would be Mirage, because I haven't done Mirage in years. It's been actually 4 years since I've done Mirage, so my opinion is kind of a non-factor because I don't remember it. So if you would agree with me, let me know, whatever. Drop a like at the sub button if you liked this video. Hit the channel membership if you want to. $5 a month, you know, supports me and my college fund. So thank you all for watching. See you in the next video. Have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.